Okay, stop sharing for me. Okay. Welcome everybody to this second in our series of men's health chats for Men's Health Week 2025. Uh, I'm Glenn Poole from the Australian Men's Health Forum, and joining us today is Stu Greig from the Stroke Foundation. So, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land wherever you're joining us from today and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'm in the uh, I'm in the Bundaberg region, which is the traditional land of the Tarablang Bunda, Garang Garang, and Balai people. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're coming from today, what part of Australia, what organisation, what brings you here. We'd love to hear from everyone who's on the Zoom about why you're here and why you're interested if you want to share that. So, we've got 5 talks this week. We had the prostate cancer awareness talk yesterday. I'm sure a couple of you came to that. That was an excellent way to kick off the week. I'm going to be taking the hot seat tomorrow with our new talk on men's health facts. On Thursday, we've got a great session with Brad Butt, a pharmacist specializing in men's health. And you can ask that pharmacist anything you want. And on Friday, we will finish with a session on how to help a mate doing it tough with our old friend Jonathan Bedlow. But for today, we're going to focus on stroke awareness. I think it's the first time we've actually focused on this topic, and a very important one it is too. And we've got a very great speaker to guide us through that conversation, Stu Greig. Stu is a StrokeSafe speaker for the Stroke Foundation, and he shares his own personal stroke experience to raise awareness about stroke prevention. He's going to be talking about what a stroke is, how to recognize the signs, what to do during an emergency, and how to reduce your risk. Stu, thanks so much for taking your time to speak with us today and for being so generous as to share your own personal experience for the benefit of others. Over to you, Stu.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Glenn. Yeah, it's really great to be here. I feel really lucky to be joining in on this conversation during Men's Health Week. And joining a whole bunch of men who are really interested and keen to talk about and learn about all things health. Health's been really, it's obviously an important topic for me, but also my family. You mentioned prostate cancer before as well, Glenn. Dad's a survivor of prostate cancer. So I think the more informed we can be, the better off we are. And I always sort of say, the more we can do these sorts of things and listening and taking small steps, we can stay stronger for longer for the people around us. Before I get started as well, I just want to acknowledge I'm coming in from Bunurong land. I'm in the western suburbs of Melbourne, so it's the traditional owners of the Bunurong people, and on the western side of the river, which I live close to, is the Wadawurrung people. And I also extend my respect and care and gratitude to First Nations people across this beautiful country of ours, and any who might be joined on the call. Also, want to throw out a bit of a g'day and welcome to Tommy as well. Tommy's in the house, and he's going to be a StrokeSafe speaker in the not too distant future, and he's coming along just to check out what it's all about. So Tommy, I'm looking for your notes at the end, buddy. Full critique and be honest and be brutal. But good luck, mate. It's a really good journey to be on this StrokeSafe journey. So speaking of that journey, let's get into the crux of it. So I'm a StrokeSafe speaker, as Glenn said, and I talk about my personal experience of stroke. So if you'll join me, we're going to go back in time just 5 short years ago to November 26, 2020. As you recall, 2020, what a bonkers year that was, right? In and out of lockdown. I'll take you back to this time in November. It was a Thursday morning. I was getting ready for work. It was 7:45. I got up out of bed, chucked my jeans on, walked into the lounge room to say good morning to my kids. And as I got there, said good morning to them. My right ear made a pinging, echoey sound. It sounded like this. It goes. As I said good morning, I was like, good morning, kids. My right ear pinged really loudly in my and to the point where I stopped in my tracks. I was like, what the hell was that? And I play drums and I get tinnitus a lot, but I get rehears a lot. This was really different. And I walked into the lounge room at the time, a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. No, what is it? It was a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And I said to my wife, who was over in the kitchen, "Oh, geez, my ears just made a funny noise." It did it again. It kind of sounded like if you drop like a metal pole on concrete, when scaffolding hits the ground, it goes as it rattles on the ground, right? And I sat on my couch, and I kind of like put my arm up, and my wife was over this shoulder. I looked at her in the kitchen. I was like, "Man, that sound, wow, that's really odd." And as I was sort of leaning on the couch, I started to shake. And so, I could feel my shoulders moving backwards and forwards. And as I looked down my chest, I could see that I was moving. And in my mind, I was like, "Oh shit!" And sorry, I talk pretty plainly as well. Forgive me. I'll do a swear jar, okay, guys? So that's my first swear. I was like, "Oh shit!" I was like, to me, I was like, "Oh my god, I'm having a seizure." And I was completely awake, completely competent, like understanding what was going on. I said to my wife, I was like, "I'm not doing this." And she came around me and put her hand on my shoulder, and she's like, "What's going on? You right?" And I went to talk to her at the time, and like in the movie Matrix, when he takes the pill, it was like my mouth glued shut, and I tried to say something to my wife, and nothing came out of my mouth. Like I was trying to talk, but it was like my mouth was glued shut. And it was at that point I knew that I was actually having a stroke, and I knew that because I'd actually attended a StrokeSafe talk before, and so through this glue in my mouth, I blurted out the word stroke. And I blurted out the word ambulance, and my wife, and that's when all hell broke loose. My poor kids, my daughter just burst into my wife. It was. I think that's the hard bit when you think back to that time. But she called up the ambulance, like called 000. We were fortunately not in one of those code browns where there was no ambulance available. I got an ambulance to my house in under 5 minutes, which I was really lucky. They packed me in the ambulance, and they got me down to my local hospital. They triaged me, gave me a CT scan, and in fact found a clot that was in my brain, causing the stroke to happen. I had a quick video call with a neurologist, and then they chucked me in another ambulance, and I got to the Royal Melbourne Hospital. All within, this was within a sort of 1 to 2 hour window. And while I was there, I was lucky enough to get a drug that was, developed. I think it was actually developed in Melbourne. Like it's got a fancy name, but it's a clot busting drug. Essentially, that's the nickname of it. And the drug did what it said on the packet. It actually busted up the clot that was in my brain. And that all happened relatively quickly. I stayed in hospital for about 5 days. I had some issues with my peripheral vision for a few days, but that cleared up. But I stand here today talking with you, fine people, really lucky because I have no ongoing deficit. Other than I get a bit clunky sometimes with my words, and stuff like that, but my vision's fine. And I count myself as one of the lucky ones, because I am here. My experience and understanding of stroke prior to this was like my pa had one in the 80s, and unfortunately disabled him quite badly. And then he had a second one, a handful of years after that, and passed away. So my knowledge of stroke was only that it took old people, and it made them disabled and it killed them. Unfortunately, we live in a time where we've got so much awareness and treatment that yeah, I'm here and I'm one of the lucky ones. So with that said, guys, I'm here to talk about all things stroke. I'm here on behalf of the Stroke Foundation, and Stroke Foundation is one of the biggest charities and leading organisations in all facets of care for stroke. So I'm going to be talking about that, and I'm going to, as Glenn said before, talk about what it is, what your risks are, and importantly, what you can do to lower your risks. With that said, I'm not a medical practitioner. I'm a stroke survivor. I'm a 45-year-old bloody daggy dad from Werribee. So I encourage questions, but if the questions are of a sort of medically specific nature, I'm not going to be able to answer them, and I'm going to suggest that you follow up with your doctor. I'm not going to suggest you follow up with Dr. Google, because Dr. Google is not our friend. All right. If you've got questions, go to your doctor and seek an actual doctor's full opinion, not Google. With that said, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. And then I'm going to get through a bit of a prezzo. As we said before, if you've got some questions, chuck them in the chat. I'm happy to chat as we go, and let's have a really good yarn after. I've got my little stopwatch timer because I waffle a lot, fellas. So how am I off for a good start? I swear and I waffle. Crikey. Good luck, everyone. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to click this button. I'm going to click that button, and there. We should have a nice big picture of the Welcome to Country. Oh, sorry, the Acknowledgement of Country, which is some really amazing artwork by First Nations artists. All right, so let's get moving. So, Stroke Foundation, as I said, they're all about preventing stroke, saving lives, and enhancing recovery. They are an amazing organisation. I think after I got out of the hospital, I connected with the Stroke Foundation really, really quickly because I wanted to. Because I was okay, and I was okay because of the information that I'd got from a similar chat like this. So I just wanted to give back. So I became a StrokeSafe speaker pretty much within 6 months of coming out of hospital. Again, they look after all stages. They sort of focus on all stages around sort of prevention, safety, and recovery. As I said, their stroke line is you experience stroke or have anyone who has, get them to connect with or the Stroke Foundation website. There's so much great information on there. With that said, you know, um, hearing from real life speakers, lived experience speakers, and talking about stroke can be confronting. So, and again, a lot of people are connected with stroke. So, if it does bring up emotions or things that are a bit challenging, make sure you debrief. Make sure you talk with a friend. Go see your doctor. Call Stroke Line. Or even Lifeline, if this brings up stuff for you, and if at the moment while we're on this meeting, if you just need a break and need to stop listening to me, go grab a cup of tea or something and give yourself a bit of space. All right. So about the foundation, as I said, they do some really extraordinary work around sort of prevention. They do heaps of community education. They've got a whole bunch of initiatives to get people in, checking their health, doing their blood pressure checks, all that sort of stuff. They certainly do things around saving lives. Um, they actually funded they got funding for the stroke ambulance, which is on the bottom right part of your screen, which is one of the only ones. Well, I think it is the only one in the country. I know they're doing a lot of advocacy work to get stroke ambulances across the country because it's an actual ambulance with a CT scanner on board. It means that if you have a stroke and you are lucky enough to receive that stroke ambulance, you can get a CT scan in your driveway and you can potentially get that life-saving clot-busting drug in your driveway before you even get to hospital. So when we think about timing, the stroke ambulance is an absolute game changer. Which is really significant. Unfortunately, there is only one, and that resides in Melbourne. But there's a lot of advocacy work for them because they're bloody expensive things. Certainly, Stroke Foundation enhance recovery. So the support they offer for stroke survivors like myself and Tommy, our family members. There's tons of information online. The amount of times I have people come to me and say, Stu, I've got an auntie that's just had a stroke. Where can what can I do? And my first point of call is always get on the website, inform yourself, encourage your auntie to get on there as well. And in terms of research, again, there's a lot of funding for research, and again, we're one of the luckiest countries because we are leading in stroke prevention. Techniques like clot removal therapy has been developed in this country. We're improving the clot busting drug in this country. The stroke ambulance, there's not many of them in the world, and we're lucky enough to have pioneered it here in Melbourne. So we are lucky because of the work of the Stroke Foundation. All right, I'll get into some of the stats now, fellas. And unfortunately, like with any stats and any sort of illness or disease, stats are really confronting, right? And so they can be really challenging to hear. But they are also important because they're the impetus for us to make changes. So let's jump into some of these really hard stats to swallow. So strokes, as we probably know and are aware, are a massive killer. They kill more women than breast cancer and more men than prostate cancer, and you wouldn't know it, but it certainly does. It is a killer of lots of people, unfortunately. The stats on how often, as you can see on the screen, one every 19 minutes. And in terms of who, a quarter of first-time strokes are experienced by people of working age. So, again, when I had my stroke, I was 40. And what I've learned, since then as well is strokes, certainly impact younger people. It's not just, people of my pa's age back in the 80s. It certainly impacts young people, working people, and unfortunately, even up to 600 children and infants every year have a stroke. There's some really hard stats to hear. But one of the best stats I can offer you guys is this stat down the bottom, which is more than 80% of strokes can be prevented. And that's a stat that I encourage people to get around and understand. And we'll understand that more as I get through the presentation. But it's a pretty sobering number that 80% of strokes can be prevented. My stroke, gentlemen, could have been prevented had I have taken action when I saw signs. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, let's get into a bit about what a stroke is. So I think there can sometimes be confusion with strokes, and there can be some confusion with, like, is it your brain or is it your heart and what's going on? Absolutely, it is all about your brain. It's about your brain being starved of oxygen that sits in our blood, our beautiful oxygen-rich blood. A stroke occurs when there's a blockage or a bleed in the brain. So either a little blood clot gets in there and blocks one of those important little arteries, and that's called an ischemic stroke. And they're the more common types of strokes. And then you've got a bleed where those little arteries can burst and bleed, which sends blood out into your brain and not to the vessels where it needs to go. And so either way, your brain gets starved of oxygen. And unfortunately, when your brain is starved of oxygen, it can die, or it can be damaged and die at a very rapid rate. And in fact, the stats on that is really horrifying. So the stat is, for every 1 minute of of brain that's starved of oxygen, 1.9 million brain cells can die every minute. Which, when you think about time and you think about brain damage, that really sort of, again, highlights and accentuates the need. If you believe a stroke is occurring, you need to act as an emergency as quickly as we can. So 1.9 million brain cells every minute, which means that about an area the size of a pea dies every 12 minutes. There is a delay, or there is this incident happening. So an ischemic stroke and a hemorrhagic stroke. Again, sometimes people get confused because the symptoms are, the signs of stroke might be around your limbs or whatever. So people might think, oh, it's got to do with your heart. It's not your heart, it's your brain. Your brain controls all those functions. And when it's starved, that's where the damage occurs. Another thing to remember is there's also a thing that's called a TIA, which is a transient ischemic attack, and that's when the blood supply is sort of temporarily blocked in your brain. And so what happens is the signs appear similar to that of a stroke, but disappear within a short amount of time. And if you ever experience any signs that are similar to a stroke, and they come on really quickly, and it might be any of the signs, like your face might droop, your arm might go limp, you might get a sudden bout of, like, you can't even remember things. So truth be told, I had a TIA following my stroke about 6 months after. And what happened to me, I woke up in the morning, and again, it's sort of this morning time thing, but my brain was like all over the shop, and not just like I'm a classic dad and I can't remember things, but like my brain wouldn't actually lock onto any solid thought, and I was very confused, and at the time I remember to myself thinking, this isn't right. Calm yourself down, buddy, and just think about your kids. What's your kids' names? And it was a bit of self-talk, and I sat there and I couldn't think of my two children. I couldn't think of their names. I could see their faces in my head, but I could not for the life of me think about their names. And it was then when I realized something's really wrong. And I again went to hospital, and the strong assumption is that it was a TIA. And again, with TIAs, similar to stroke, even if the symptoms or the signs disappear, you need to respond like it's a stroke. Call an ambulance, call 000, get an ambulance, go to hospital, because a TIA can be a warning that a bigger, like a serious stroke, a full stroke is on the way. And so to be able to get to hospital is the most important thing to do, because there's obviously some preventative things they can do to stop a more significant stroke coming through. How are we going? We going okay, fellas? Let's get into the signs of stroke. I know that we often think about stroke, and when I think about my pa, I certainly think about sort of deficit in one side of his body. But there's a well-known acronym that the Stroke Foundation use to promote understanding of the signs of stroke. And I will preface we'll go through the acronym. And there are pictures, and the pictures are quite confronting in terms of what they do. So I'll get into it. So the acronym is called FAST, and F, the first letter of that acronym, is for faith. And so a classic sign of stroke can be when there is a deficit on one side of the body. And so F is for face. And the question that you need to ask yourself is, has their face drooped? When you look at the face, and clearly the one on the screen, a confronting one, shows that the woman's face is definitely drooped. You can see in her mouth and her eyes particularly. And what you can do, you can ask the person to try and smile. You can see if their smile is like normal and is balanced. That's another way of gauging how their face is going. So has their face droop? Can they smile? Can they show their teeth? Okay, the next acronym for FAST is A, and A is for arms. And again, with that paralysis and that deficit in the limbs, can they lift both arms? Often, when I was having my stroke, they were saying, can you put both arms up? Can you hold your arms out straight? And sometimes there'll be a really clear sort of deficit in one side. Sometimes, it might only be a partial deficit, and you might have one arm right up in the air and the other arm just barely above their lap. So A is for arms. Can they lift both their arms? S is for speech. And so this, for me, was one of the more standout signs when I had my stroke, that my speech completely disappeared. As I said, my mouth was like glue. So is their speech slurred? Can they understand you? Can you understand them? A mate of mine from work, his name is Bob, and he is a real person, because every time I talk about Bob, people are like, yeah, that sounds like a made up person. Bob is a good mate of mine. He also had a stroke. Part of his signs when he had a stroke is that his speech was all back to front. So by the time he got to hospital, and they were sort of asking him some questions about himself, and he was 42 at the time, and they asked him, "How old are you, Bob?" And he's like, "I'm 24." And they're, "Sorry, mate, yeah, he's clearly not a 24-year-old young buck. He's a 42-year-old silver-haired man." And "Sorry, Bob, how old are you, mate?" And he's like, "Oh, sorry, no, I'm 24." And he couldn't get his numbers around the right way. So when we think about speech, we don't think about, can they talk, but is their speech slurred or more slurred than normal? Can they understand you? Because again, they might be having difficulty in understanding what you're saying. So are they looking at you understanding? So you might ask them a question: what day is it today? What month is it? So if they can't understand you, they'll obviously won't respond. And can you understand them? So F is for face, A is for arm, S is for speech, and T, as I've spoken about a few times, is for time. If you see any signs like this, and even if it passes like a TIA, you must call 000 immediately. It's always hard to call 000. When we've needed to call that, even in this house, when I was going through things, you're always sort of second guessing yourself. Do I really need it? Is it that serious? Yes, it is that serious. You must call 000. Even if the signs pass, you should call 000. As someone once said to me, you're never going to get in trouble, for calling an ambulance and it turns up and it's not an emergency. If you're suspecting stroke, if you're suspecting stroke, call an ambulance straight away. It's not a drive to the doctors. It's not a drive to the emergency department. It's call 000 and get an ambulance emergency, because time equals brain. When we think about those yucky stats from before, every minute could be up to 1.9 million brain cells. Call 000 immediately. So just to recap on the acronym, so it's FAST. So you have to think fast and act fast. F is for face, A is for arm, S is for speech, and T is for time. Get onto the Stroke Foundation website. They've got some really great resources that you can get and share in your workplaces and stuff. But what's really important as well, fellas, is this really important information, and if there's going to be a takeaway today, like, please remember the acronym F for face, A for arms, S for speech, and T for time. But share it with your friends, share it with your family. Say, I spoke to this swearing guy from bloody Werribee down in Melbourne, and he kept hounding me about this message. Tell your friends and family about it, because it's great that you might identify it, but it's so important that your friends, families, and colleagues can identify those crucial signs of stroke, fast signs. All right. We're going to get into some of the impacts of stroke, because obviously wherever stroke impacts in the brain, will impact different sort of things. So and the impact of stroke is really individual depending on the type of stroke, if it's a block or a bleed, and obviously where it happens in the brain and how badly it's been injured. Considering the time as well. And as you know, our brain controls everything we do, and it's sort of split up into two, left side, right side hemispheres, and then the different sort of areas called lobes all obviously control the different things. So when you consider your brain like that and where the damage might be, you know, stroke can impact every single facet and part of your life. As you see on there, things like motor control, your personality can change. Like I remember a friend of mine's wife, after I had my stroke, asked my wife, you know, was I the same? Was I still the quirky, funny fella that I was before? Because when her father had a stroke, he changed dramatically. He turned in, he got grumpier. He got just he changed. His personality was different. Again, you got to think it can impact on so much stuff: your vision, your hearing, your senses, your taste, all those sorts of things. Again, sort of breaks it down a bit more through some of the areas. Where I had my stroke was in the basilar artery, which was it's right down the back of the brain near the brain stem. And so at the time, I felt like, oh, geez, that must have been a good stroke to get, because it was, like I was lucky. But I remember chatting to my neurologist, and he talked about basilar artery strokes as being quite dangerous because they are so close to your brain stem, which was a really humbling and sobering moment all at once, to understand just how close I got to maybe not being here. All right. Importantly, fellas, to get into that 80% of people of avoidable stroke, I think what's really important is to understand your stroke risk. And now there's certain things with stroke risk that you can't change. So there's the things that we can't, which are the factors like, as we get older, our risk goes up. Being male, we have a higher risk. If you've got stroke within your family, so if there's a family history of stroke, and also genetically, there's some cultures that are more prone to strokes as well. Those things, obviously, things you can't change, and also things like previous stroke. If you've had a stroke or a TIA before, it puts you in a higher risk category. But importantly, as I said, 80% of strokes can be prevented. Now, what I might do, just because I'm sharing my screen, I might just stop sharing just for a moment, just to explain why I could have been in that 80% category, because it's really important to know. So for me, my stroke occurred because I had a DVT form in my leg. So if again going back to COVID, I was working from home, as a lot of us were, so desk bound. I was, joining meetings, leaving meetings, joining meeting, leaving meeting, go to the toilet, come back to my computer, joining meeting, grab a coffee, come back to my computer. So all day, every day, as a lot of us were during COVID, I was sitting at my desk for the whole day. So essentially, I was doing a long haul flight every single day. The DVT formed in my leg. I knew something was going on with my leg. It got a bit puffy, right? Got a little bit puffy around my ankles. I was getting a bit of a single leg cankle going on. And so what did I do? I Dr. Googled it, which again is the stuff I tell you not to do, right? But this is because I've learned. I Dr. Googled it, and I sort of led the Google as well, because I was like, oh, my mum's got shitty circulation in her legs. So I was like, my mum has shitty circulation. Would I have shitty circulation? Of course it comes back, yes, blame your mum, right? Did I go to the doctor? No. So what happened was, that DVT, it dropped a clot into my bloodstream. It got through a hole in my heart that I didn't know I had. It's called a PFO. It's got a fancy name. I don't know the fancy name to it. It's a PFO. It's a little flap. So that clot got through the hole in my heart and gave me, and caused the stroke. If I had have just gone to the bloody doctor and said, hey, I've got a puffy leg, I reckon it's my mum's fault, he would probably go, oh, let's get a bit of a scan on that. Would have found the DVT, likely, and then likely would have put me on blood thinners, and I would have then been in that 80%, preventable stroke. But I didn't, because I was a typical bloke and I stuck my head in the sand. I Dr. Googled something when I shouldn't have, and unfortunately had to go through a really horrific trauma that nearly could have killed me. So again, if if I can encourage you, do not Dr. Google. Go to go to your doctor and don't blame your mum for things. There's a couple of little keepsakes that blame your mum for things sometimes, if you can. Anyway, let's get back on track. Sorry, but I thought I'd just give you the face to face for that one. Let me go back. Hang about. There we go. Share screen. And I go from current. Boom. Have you still got me? Yep, cool. All right, so they're the things we can't change. But here's some of the things we can, right? So if you suffer from high cholesterol, high blood pressure, atrial fibrillation, or type 2 diabetes, they're things within a range of control, because they're also things that can lead to stroke. If you have out of control blood pressure, out of control cholesterol, atrial fibrillation, or type 2 diabetes, if you're not managing that, you need to be managing your numbers. One of the most important things you can do is manage those numbers. So making sure that you're going to your GP regularly, if any of those things sit with you, make sure you've got a really great relationship with your GP, and you're always, A, you know your numbers, and B, you're talking about your numbers. And if you haven't gone to the doctors in a little while, make it a regular thing. There's always this big push. I've often seen, we've talked about prostate cancer before. The E.J. Whitten Foundation talks about yearly checks, a time to test they call it, and I agree with it so much. Even if you're fighting fit and you're well, but you haven't been to the docs in a while, go, absolutely go, get all your stuff checked, particularly your numbers, because again, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, atrial fibrillation, type 2 diabetes are massive causes, and certainly can lead to stroke. So know your doctor, ask them lots of questions, be honest with them, and know your numbers. Another really important thing to consider, well, to do, not consider, you need to do it. You need to eat better. And if a mate of mine who's a dietitian, she's the best. She's always like, Stu, rainbow on your plate. You've got to think about your plate like a bit of a rainbow plate. You've got to make sure you got lots of veggies on those plates at dinner time, fellas. And that, even though we can bask in that beautiful golden glow sometimes of deep fry, we need to actually, that's the sometimes food. We've got to really load up on our fruit and veg. I hate fruit, but I've got to smash the veg. So it's about eating balanced, and it's, there's no surprise there. It's about minimizing your salt and cutting that out. Again, one great tip someone told me about salt was stop adding it while you're cooking. Because there's people who they'll salt the water, then they'll do this, and then they'll add the salt, and then they'll do a bit more, and then they'll taste a little bit of salt, and then they'll get to the table, and then they slam on the salt. And someone said to me once, cut out all of it except the last bit. Just add a little bit of salt at the table. Then you're actually tasting the salt right there and then, which I thought makes a whole lot of sense. It is about limiting the added sugar. Sugar is snuck into everywhere. So, if you want to be like me and be a bit of a label nerd as well, you can check out the amount of sugar and salt is in your packaged foods. But where you can, just limit that sugar. Again, my dietitian mate says, when you go to the supermarket, spend most of your time on the outside of the supermarket, in terms of don't get into the middle section, because the outsides are your fresh meat, your meats and your fresh veg. And spend heaps of time there, load up your trolley there, and then get the other processed stuff as you get in. And also, it goes without saying, excuse me, drink plenty of water. We need to be really hydrating our systems. So that's the eat well tips. The active tips as well. It's about the minimum 30 minutes daily. You got to be regular with your exercise, and it's hard sometimes. And certainly during lockdown and COVID, that was what sort of really caused me to get my little puffy leg. The fact that I was sitting at my desk all day, every day. But now I just try and find ways to add movement into my day. Obviously with I still work at a desk, so I've got a stand desk. I make sure I take my breaks. So I'm getting out. When I'm at work, I'll park at the end of the car park, so I've got the longest walk to my desk. I walk the dog every day. It's that sort of stuff that I'm trying to make the physicality, make that movement. But there's some great suggestions there as well. Get active with a friend or family member. Sign up for your weekly classes. I like fishing, so I'm always I like to get out, but I like to, again, just try and walk as much as I can. Next one's always a funny one, because it's Australian. We've got this drinking culture, but this isn't about don't drink. It's just about understanding your drink. It's about avoiding alcohol. it does increase your risk of stroke. The less you drink, the better you obviously your health, and it lowers your risk. Might put you in that 80%. There's some healthy drinking suggestions there, around 10 standard drinks a week, or no more than 4 in one day. Um, for this, like I'm a bit of a craft beer nerd. Like I really love that craft beer. It's really yummy. Yeah, I laugh just because every time I'm at my dad's house, my father-in-law, they're like bloody wanker beer, like. But I love that sort of that stuff. And fortunately, there's a lot of alcohol-free craft beer now. There's a lot of alcohol-free drinks. Full stop. So it's even about maybe not stopping, but maybe just switching it out. And again, like as I said, I like going fishing. So instead of like going fishing with a mate, drinking beers, I might have an alcohol-free beer instead. Heaven forbid. Another good one. My father-in-law says, alcohol-free beer. It's like going to a dance and dancing with your sister. But you know what? There's plenty of health benefits to reducing and swapping it out. Yeah, sorry, my little anecdotes. Hey, look, there's no easy way about saying this one, and I'll preface it by saying that I know how much I know smoking addiction. Like my mum's been a smoker for 60 odd years, and so I appreciate that it's very easier said than done. But the cold hard facts is that quitting smoking halves your risk of a stroke. If you stop smoking, your risk of having a stroke drops by 50% straight away. So it is never too late to quit smoking. And if you're got higher risk, if you've got high blood pressure, high cholesterol, it's in your family, you got diabetes and you smoke as well, one thing you could do straight away to reduce your risk is stopping smoking. As it says, within a month of quitting, blood pressure can return to its normal range. But it ain't easy. But there's some really great supports through things like Quitline. Go chat to your doctor about quitting. Take steps towards quitting, because it might not be. Obviously, it's not as simple as just giving up the darts. It might be a long process. But as I said before, we want to stay stronger for longer, and smoking actively takes away from that. All right, I'm nearly finishing up, guys. So you've been really great. So thanks for sticking with me. So a couple of little takeaways for you. So it's about understanding your stroke risk. So go and visit your GP and have a heart health check as well. So check on all your numbers, and manage those numbers. Again, your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your diabetes, and your atrial fibrillation. If you've got any of those things, make sure you stay on top of them. Get active. Try and build exercise into your day. Eat better. Reduce your grog or drink no grog beer. Stop smoking. Share the FAST message. What was it? Face, speech, and time. Share the FAST acronym with your friends and loved ones. And heaven forbid, if you're affiliated with a sporting group, club, school, men's group, encourage them to have a StrokeSafe speaker come out and have a yarn about it. Because, funnily enough, if I hadn't have seen a StrokeSafe presentation, I might not have known the signs. And very well could be in a much worse position, or actually not even here. So it might just save your life. So they're your takeaways. I'm giving them to you for you. They're your takeaways today. If you want to get involved in the Stroke Foundation, there's heaps of ways to get involved. They're a bloody beautiful organisation. You can give time, you can raise funds, you can become a speaker like myself or even Tommy. You can make a provision for Stroke Foundation in your will. You can stay informed. If you want to donate, there's a QR code there, or just jump on their website. I'm going to stop sharing my screen momentarily, and I'll take some questions. And then, so there's a slide for that. And then what I might do after the questions, I've got a QR code, just because the Stroke Foundation, run off the back of funding to fund all the amazing stuff. The StrokeSafe program is free, but this is a bit of a survey link for later on. But I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Let's have a bit of a yarn. But yeah, thanks heaps for your time, fellas. And I'm sorry if I've been a bit loose and swore and those things, but hey, I'm human.
It's been great, Stu. It's wonderful. You've brought all of your personality to the conversation, and I don't know what you were like before the stroke, but it doesn't seem like it's affected you too much. So
Oh, mate, I've been pretty lucky, and it's funny you even say that. Like, when my pa had a stroke, it took a lot of him. Like, it took his physicality, like it took his right hand side, but it took him. It took his memory. It took his speech. And I remember, you know, and I often I can get quite upset when I think about it, because when I was having my stroke, I thought about him. I was thinking about him the whole time, and I was really scared about that part. I was scared about losing me, and so because of that, it was funny. Like while I was in the hospital, while I was in the ambulance, when I was in the hospital, I kept dropping dad's jokes like the whole time. Which I remember, like my wife even reflected to me, because when by the time she got to the hospital, like, you know, I said something really daggy and silly, and later on she reminded me of it, and I remember just like thinking, well, I was doing it because I think that's what I do anyway, because I'm daggy and silly, but also, you know, and also to break awkwardness, but I also was doing it just to make sure it was still there. You know, so I was like, again, I feel so thankful that, you know, that I am still here, you know, and again, I joked with my neurologist like at that first time, and I was like, oh, basilar artery stroke, that must have just killed off all the dumb in my brain, and now I'm just so smart, you know. And that's where like he really soberingly slapped me down and said, no, basilar artery strokes are ferocious, man. And I was like, whoa, okay, so I dodged a bullet. Yeah, sorry, again, I waffled out silly things, but no, I'm still here. But how do we go for questions? Have
Yeah.
we got
So
any